That morning, I thought I was making her happy. A new car with a wide red ribbon stood in the driveway, and I walked Vanessa up to it with my hands over her eyes. When I took my hands away, she said nothing for a few seconds, and the smile slowly faded from her face. It wasn't the color she disliked, it was the brand, because she had wanted a Porsche. I told her the car cost $100,000, and all I got back was a short, "So what? You're a billionaire." She put the keys right back in my hand. "Call me when you trade it for a Porsche." On the table by the door lay a second gift she never even opened. I stood in the middle of my own yard where everything belonged to me, holding the keys in one hand and a box nobody wanted in the other, and I could not think of a single woman who had ever looked at me instead of my money. That evening, my assistant Paul found me in the study in front of the mirror, an expensive suit, a watch, and a huge empty house behind my back. He said what he had said more than once before, that I had picked the wrong woman again. But it wasn't only about her. As long as I stayed a billionaire, there was no way to test how anyone felt about me, which meant the billionaire had to disappear for a while. I took off my watch and set it on the desk, and my phone and my jacket followed. "If you take the money away, is there anything left in me worth loving?" Paul thought I was joking. I was leaving home for a month with $100 in cash, no cards and no help from anyone, and nobody was supposed to know where I was. My name was well known on Wall Street, but almost nobody remembered my face, and that worked in my favor. I put on an old jacket, took a plain backpack, and walked out through the back gate of my own house. Just yesterday, doormen had been opening doors for me, and now people on the street looked right through me. And for the first time, I learned what it feels like to be invisible. I spent the first night at the bus station, and the $100 melted away faster than I expected. So by the evening of the second day, all I had left in my pocket was a handful of change. Hungry, I walked into a small family diner on the edge of town and sat down at a table just to get warm. A young waitress with kind eyes and a quick smile brought me a glass of water, and I looked at the menu, put it down, and asked for water only. That one order told her everything. A few minutes later, a plate of hot food I had not ordered was sitting in front of me. I told her I couldn't pay for it. She took the plate away without a word, and I lowered my eyes, sure that was the end of it. And a second later, the food was back on the table, this time with no check. "Now you can. Just eat." I waited for questions or for pity, but she was already taking an order at the next table. I looked at that $10 dinner the way you look at the first, truly valuable gift of your life. And that's what it was. Everything I had ever been given to a billionaire. And this plate was set down in front of a man who had nothing. The diner was closing. It was raining outside, and I had nowhere to go. So I stayed under the awning by the door. Laura, as the customers called her, came out last, locked the door, and saw me. She asked if I had a place to sleep, and I looked away. That silence told her enough. She stood there in the rain trying to talk me into going to the shelter by the station, and I kept saying I would get there on my own, just so she would go back inside where it was warm. In the end, she gave up, put her umbrella in my hand, and ran off, soaked to the skin. I stayed under a stranger's cheap umbrella, a man who owned 3 houses on different coasts, and of course, I went nowhere. The next morning, she worked with a red nose, sneezing every few minutes and laughing it off in front of the customers. This girl had gotten soaked through for a man she had first laid eyes on a few hours earlier. I did get a place to sleep that night, and this is how it happened. Laura and her father lived right upstairs above the diner. She came up soaking wet. Her father asked where her umbrella was, and he heard about the man by the door who had nowhere to go. He walked to the window, looked down, and put on his jacket. A minute later, they were both standing in front of me, and Henry, that was her father's name, was leading me inside. The diner took up the first floor of an old 2-story house. Behind it were the kitchen and a wooden shed used for storage. Upstairs, Henry lived with his daughter, and next to the storage room stood an empty little room where a night watchman used to sleep. That was the room they gave me. I told them they didn't know me at all and were taking a complete stranger under their roof. Somebody once helped me without asking questions. When they asked my name, I said just David. Laura asked about my last name. I said nothing, and she decided I was hiding from my old life. In a way, I was. In the morning, Henry set a huge plate of eggs in front of me and said, "Nobody leaves this house hungry." And when I finished, he nodded toward the backyard and added that nobody lives here for free. So there were the crates. A man who only yesterday had been running thousands of employees now spent the whole day hauling vegetables out of the storage room. And that evening, Henry put dinner in front of me without a word, and there was more respect in that silence than in every speech I had ever heard in a boardroom. That was also when I learned the story of the place. Laura's mother had opened the diner years before. The walls still remembered her voice. And after she died, her husband and daughter kept it going together. Laura had worked there since she was 15. To them, it wasn't just a business. It was home. In my backpack was my phone switched off with dozens of missed calls. I looked at the screen and turned it off again because for the first time in years, somebody was waiting for me in the evening. It didn't take long to find out I wasn't the only one looking at Laura. A few days later, an expensive car pulled up at the diner, and out of it stepped a man in a perfect suit, holding a big bouquet. This was Victor, a local developer. He owned stores and lots up and down the street, and he had been after Laura for a long time. He shook Henry's hand, paid her a compliment, and announced that he had booked the best restaurant in town. And he took her refusal with the condescending smile of a man used to getting his way sooner or later. On his way out, he told Henry that his offer for the house still stood, and the price went up every month. He wanted that lot for a new row of stores, and he had been coming around with that conversation for years. My wife built this place. It's not for sale. Then Victor noticed me by the back door and asked who I was. Laura said I was a friend of theirs. He looked over my old jacket and told her under his breath that she could have any life she wanted and was wasting her time on this. Don't call a person this. He drove off, leaving the bouquet on the counter, and Laura carried the flowers outside and put them in a bucket by the door so people passing by could enjoy them. I stood there with a crate in my hands, and one simple thing was clear to me. She had stood up for a broke handyman who had nothing to give her. The days were made of small things, and with every one of them, I wanted to go back home less. I fixed the broken sign above the door, eased a door that stuck, painted the fence with Henry, and learned to live without a secretary, a schedule, or security. A workshop nearby was looking for a helper, and the night before the interview, Laura put a package in front of me with a plain shirt from the store on the corner. In my old jacket, they wouldn't even hear me out. I told her she was spending too much on me, and she was surprised. $12? The diner was barely making ends meet, and they didn't have 12 spare dollars lying around, and she spent them anyway. I put the new shirt on, and Laura straightened my collar. Her hand stayed a second longer than it needed to, and we both understood it. I got the job because they needed hands, not a resume. And that evening, I laid my first pay on the kitchen table for the room and the food. Henry looked at those few crumpled bills for a long time, then put them in a drawer and said I was the first tenant who paid on time. The three of us laughed, and I kept thinking that this money was worth more than every contract I had ever signed. Turning Victor down was a dangerous thing. He wasn't used to losing, especially in front of people. All that week, he drove by the diner as if by chance, and every time he saw me in the yard with the crates and Laura standing next to me. Then he decided to end it in one move and came back ready. A new car with a wide red ribbon on the hood pulled up at the diner, and he set the keys on the counter in front of Laura, in front of the customers, in front of her father, and in front of me. All she had to say was yes, and the car was hers. Laura picked up the keys and put them right back in his hand. He asked if she planned to stand behind that counter her whole life, and he got a calm, "If I have to." Then he nodded in my direction and raised his voice so everyone could hear. Was she really choosing a man who couldn't buy her a bus ticket? Yes. Victor looked at her almost with pity and asked whether she understood what she was giving up. "I do. And you still don't understand why." He walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the dishes, and I couldn't get over it all evening. In front of everyone, she had chosen me, a man she believed didn't have a dime. We went out for a walk, and I asked if she had really turned down the car. She said she didn't need a car, and when I pointed out that most people would have taken it, she smiled and said, then I should date most people. We laughed and fell quiet, and then I asked what she needed for herself. Someone I can trust. My smile went out right away. She was asking for the one thing I had never given her. She still didn't know who I really was, And every day she spent with me was built on that lie. Under the old streetlight at the corner, she stopped and looked at me, and our first kiss happened there, in a circle of yellow light, in the light rain. The best thing that ever happened to me didn't happen to Whitmore the billionaire. It happened to a man unloading crates in an old jacket. After that evening, I couldn't stay silent any longer. She had asked for trust, and I still hadn't told her the main thing. At the door, I gathered my nerve and said I had something important to tell her, but she smiled and asked me to leave it until tomorrow because her father was waiting for us at dinner and everything was getting cold. That night, I turned my phone on for the first time in a month and called Paul. Come pick me up tomorrow at noon at the diner on East Street. So the experiment is over? Yes. First, I'm going to tell Laura the truth, and then I want to show her my real life. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time, choosing the words for the most honest conversation of my life, not knowing yet that I was exactly one night too late. While I was choosing my words, other people had already dug up the truth about me. Victor had put his men on finding out who I was. He was looking for any dirt at all, and what he found was far bigger. That very morning, photographs landed on his desk of me in a suit at the steps of a private jet, along with the cover of a business magazine that read, David Whitmore, net worth in the billions. The poor man he had humiliated in front of everyone turned out to be hundreds of times richer than he was, and he understood something. This truth could split us apart better than any lie. At noon, he walked into the diner with his phone in his hand and announced to Laura that he had brought a better gift than a car. She told him to leave, but she glanced at the screen anyway and laughed. The man in the photo was standing by a jet in a suit worth several times more than their diner. Then Victor zoomed in, and when only the face was left on the screen, her laughter stopped. At that same second, a long black car pulled up outside, the one I had called the night before. Paul got out of it, opened the rear door, and spoke in my direction while I was walking into the room with a crate in my hands. Mr. Whitmore, your car, as you asked. The diner went very quiet. The car that was supposed to be part of my honest confession gave me away 1 second before I could speak, in front of Victor and on his terms. Paul held the door open, but I stood in the middle of the room, looking only at Laura. She asked me to tell her the man in the photograph was somebody else. I told her it was me. She asked if I was rich, and I said I was. How rich? I said nothing, and Victor answered for me with great pleasure, spelling out every word, billions. Laura set the phone down on the counter and walked out the back door. The billions didn't impress her, the lie crushed her. That evening, in the same kitchen where they had fed me breakfast, I listened to the hardest words of my life. She had let me into her home. She had told me about her life. Her father had treated me like a son, and I had sat at their table lying every single day. I came in that same $12 shirt, and Laura noticed it. Was even that part of your game? No, that was the realest thing of all. I don't know what to believe anymore. I told her the truth. I wanted to know whether anyone could love me without the money, and at first it was a test, and then it all became real. And who gave you the right to test me? I had no answer. Henry stood up from the table and said quietly, "You'd better go, son." That word hurt more than anything else. I walked out into the night, and the door that had been open to me for a whole month closed behind my back. That night, I was certain I would never open it again. The huge house welcomed me back as if nothing had happened. The staff set a table for 20 for one man. A perfect breakfast went cold on the white tablecloth, and I kept thinking about that cramped kitchen and the laughter around the table. Everything I wanted had stayed behind there, and I tried to get it back the only way I had known all my life, with money. I sent Laura a piece of jewelry in a velvet box, and it came back unopened. Then I called Henry and offered to clear all their debts, repair the house, and buy the lot next door so they would never have to think about money again. His voice was calm, and that made it even harder to hear. You're trying to fix with money what you broke with a lie. I asked him what I should do, and he told me that was something I had to figure out myself. And a few days later, A taxi pulled into my yard, and Vanessa got out of it. News that the billionaire was back had traveled fast. That same Audi was still standing by the wall under a cover, and Vanessa nodded at it with a smile, as though that month had never happened. She had thought it over and decided the car wasn't so bad after all. I took the keys off the hook and held them out to her. "Take it." She lit up and reached for me. The car, not me. I walked past her, and behind my back, everything went very quiet. Vanessa had gotten me back along with the money, and she was perfectly happy. Laura had refused my flowers, my jewelry, and my help, and I finally understood what she had been waiting for all along. Not gifts, but the man I had been beside her that whole month. Forgiveness can't be bought. It can only be earned. A few days later, I went back to that town without a limousine, without an entourage, in ordinary clothes, but this time under my full name. I rented a room 2 blocks from the diner, went back to the same workshop, unloaded crates by that familiar porch in the mornings, and fixed whatever broke, asking for nothing. Laura didn't believe my words anymore, so my actions had to do the talking. She would see me through the window and move to the back of the room, and I would come again. Nothing was keeping me there, and that was exactly why I stayed. One night, a storm hit the town. The wind tore off part of the roof and broke the sign I had once fixed. Henry and I worked until dawn, closed the roof with fresh boards, and put the sign back up. And toward morning, we fell asleep right there on the steps. I woke up because something warm came down on my shoulders. Laura was standing over us with 2 blankets. She covered her father with one and me with the other. She walked back inside without a word, and I lay there under her blanket, afraid to move, in case that morning turned out to be nothing but a happy dream. Victor saw all of it his own way. I hadn't left. Laura was softening, and time was working against him. He came around one more time, but he wasn't talking about restaurants anymore. He named a price this street had never seen and warned her there wouldn't be a second offer like it. Laura told him her mother's house was not for sale at any price, and she wasn't going to marry him, no matter how many times he asked. He could buy half the street, but he could buy neither her nor the house she had grown up in. She had turned him down when he had money. She had turned him down after she learned the truth about me. She had turned him down even when one signature from her would have freed her family from every debt. That evening, a humiliated Victor called 2 men and told them to scare that family badly enough to make them want to leave. That night, I was working late at the workshop and saw the glow through the window. The storage shed behind the diner was burning, and the flames were already climbing the wall to the 2nd floor, where Laura and her father were asleep. By the time I got there, she was standing in the street in the smoke. Neighbors were running with buckets. Somebody was calling the fire department. The smoke had woken her first, and she had run outside, sure that her father was right behind her, and only now did she turn toward the door and go cold. "Where's my dad?" His room was at the far end of the house, and the fire had already cut off the hallway, so I didn't say anything. I just stepped into the smoke. After that, I remember it all in pieces. The smoke burned my eyes. I had to breathe down near the floor, and I moved almost by feel until I found the door of that far room. I was shaking Henry by the shoulder and pulling him to his feet when a beam came down behind us with a crash, and the heat hit my back so hard that I covered him with my own body at the doorway. Outside, in those minutes, nobody knew whether we were alive. Sparks burst out of the window. Laura screamed. The neighbors held her by the shoulders and wouldn't let her near the door, and then it went quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when there's no hope left. The 2 of us came out together. I walked him over to the neighbors, and at the doorstep, I sat down on the ground and couldn't get up again. Laura rushed to me, saying my name over and over, and the first thing I asked was whether her father was alive. She said he was, and only then did I let myself close my eyes. A burned hand, a jacket covered in soot, and her palm holding mine and not letting go. But I didn't hear the word forgiveness that night, because the fire had proved my love, but it hadn't erased my lie. The firefighters said it right away. The flames had started outside on two sides at once, so the house had been set on fire. A few days later, the camera of the store across the street helped find the car that led them to the two men who set the fire, and those two named the man who had paid them. They came for Victor in broad daylight, in front of the whole street. The officer only said that the men he had hired were already talking, and Victor gave himself away with a single sentence. "I told them just to scare the family. I never wanted to kill anybody." They took him away, and on his way out, Victor looked back at the burned house at the end of the street, but Laura didn't even glance in his direction. She was standing in the ashes, holding the only thing that had survived from the wall of the dining room, a photograph of her mother in a darkened frame. I saw her crying, and I didn't go to her. In that moment, she needed anyone in the world except me. But I knew what to do next. A few days later, she saw me among the burned boards, clearing the ashes with the workers, my hand still bandaged. Her mother's house was going to stand on that street again. It took us several weeks to rebuild the house. I came every morning, carried out the burned wood, put up rafters with the workers, painted the walls, and never once brought up the two of us with Laura. When they hung the sign above the door again, the house was ready for customers, and I had no more excuse to show up there in the mornings. I came to say goodbye. Henry asked where I would go now, and I said home. He looked at me carefully. "So, this isn't home to you anymore?" I glanced at Laura standing in the doorway and said that wasn't mine to decide. Then I started toward the road, and I heard my name behind me. She came closer and said I had hurt her very badly, and that she had been angry for a long time. And then she admitted what she had been thinking all those weeks. At first, it seemed to her that I was trying to earn forgiveness. But day after day went by. She never said a word to me, and I kept coming anyway. "You stop trying to prove anything." "Because I love you." "No more tests." "Never." Our second kiss happened at the diner door, under the new sign. The first one went to a man who had nothing. The second went to a man who had lost everything and started over. A few months went by. One evening, I brought Laura to the diner after closing, sat her down at that same table where I had once sat with a handful of change in my pocket, took the seat across from her, and asked for water only. She laughed and asked if I was serious. My old workshop pickup was parked outside because that evening didn't belong to the billionaire. It belonged to the man she had once fed. I unbuttoned my jacket, and under it was that same plain shirt, and Laura was surprised that I still wore it. It's the most expensive gift anyone ever gave me. "It costs $12. Exactly. I took out a small box and went down on one knee. On that first day, she had fed me when she thought I had nothing to give back. And after that, she gave me what I could never have bought with any amount of money. I asked her to marry me, and I heard the shortest and most precious word of my life: yes. We had the wedding in the garden of my house, which for the first time didn't feel empty. Henry walked his daughter down the aisle, and Laura looked at me in my expensive suit exactly the way she had once looked at a man in an old jacket. A year later, the diner was open from morning to night again. Laura stood behind the counter beside her father, and a photograph of her mother in a new frame hung on the wall. One evening, we were sitting in our usual spot when a man in an old jacket with nothing in his hands appeared in the doorway, just like the one who had walked in there once. A new waiter stepped toward him to show him out, but Laura and I got there first and said it at the same time, in one voice: "Feed him." We looked at each other and laughed. I once set out to find a woman who would love me without my money, and I found much more than that: a family, a home, and the answer to my question. What truly makes a person rich is the people who stay when the money is gone.